So I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Diana Liverman. I've known Diana for quite a while now as a really driven and important part of a sort of international network of researchers working on global change. She seems to be involved in all of the important initiatives in global programs and statements at Copenhagen and so on. And so I think, and also, I have to say that one of the arguments I made to invite her here, which is a long way to come from Arizona, is that actually I think it's very important that she's a woman leading in science in this area, and also this is a very important part of what we stand for. So Diana, welcome. Thanks a lot for coming here, and we really look forward to your talk.
Well, thank you very much, Franz. And given that I work on climate change, I should say that I didn't come to Europe just to give this talk. That would be too embarrassing in terms of my carbon emissions. I'm going to be spending 2 weeks and going to a number of other meetings, but it was a nice coincidence to be able to come here. And I'm really very honoured to be able to speak at this celebration of the Amsterdam Global Change Institute. Having led transformations at 3 interdisciplinary global change institutes, first at Penn State, then at Oxford, and now at the University of Arizona, I know how challenging and exciting such an enterprise can be, and I wish you the very best. And somebody commented in the break that they hoped I wasn't sort of shocked by all the boosterism of Amsterdam and the Netherlands, and I said, really, not at all. You really do have, your city and country does have some of the world's very best environmental scholars and research groups. I was here a few years ago and commented that probably 3 of the top 10 environmental institutes in Europe are all in the Netherlands, and you've got people leading some of the most important global change programs, and many of them I'm proud to call my friends and collaborators. I would make one comment. The parallel that was, or the aspiration to be like Harvard, well, that's good in terms of scientific quality, but the Free University and its Science for Society really reminds me as much of the land-grant tradition in the United States, which is very different from the Ivy League of serving society. So maybe think about also places like Wisconsin that have that land-grant tradition as you move ahead. I think that the Amsterdam Global Change Institute is very well placed and prepared to solve some of the grand problems of our age. How to understand and manage the transformation of the Earth's systems by human activity while increasing human well-being and reducing poverty. How can we ensure food security, safe water, clean energy and livable communities while protecting landscapes and respecting the other species that inhabit our planet? These problems and questions require partnerships between disciplines and between science and society, as already been mentioned by previous speakers. One of the most challenging and important collaborations to solving these grand challenges is the link between the natural and the social sciences. And I was interested to hear that you have a word in Dutch that sort of encompasses the two, because in English I'm always struggling when people say science. I want them to be including the social sciences as science, but that doesn't always happen. So we need the natural sciences and social sciences to join together to understand the complex interactions between humans and nature. And this is the focus of what I'm going to talk about today. What I want to do is to reflect on some of the ways that natural sciences sometimes misunderstand the social sciences. And this is based on decades of work that I have been involved in trying to bridge natural and social sciences in my research and within interdisciplinary research institutes. And because I'm a geographer, I'm trained in both natural and social sciences. So in some ways, even though I might be seen to be a little critical of natural sciences, I also see myself as one. And sometimes when I'm with social scientists, they think I'm a natural scientist and vice versa. And I hope that the natural scientists in the audience won't be offended by what might come across as caricatures, because this is a very short speech. And I'm sure that because you're all 21st century natural scientists, you may feel that some of the views that I express or ascribe to the natural sciences are no longer held. And of course, there are lots of myths that the social sciences have about the natural sciences, and I think someone could do a parallel talk. But I decided to try to be a little bit provocative and cheeky to try and provoke discussion, because I'm talking right before lunch. So the myths and understandings that I'm going to talk about fall into 5 areas. The first I'm going to call ideas of environmental determinism. The second are about assumptions of how to communicate environmental science to society and the benefits of environmental information. The third are a couple of myths about explanations of environmental change. The fourth, I'll just touch on one of many debates about how to best achieve a sustainable society. And then my final set are a set of myths that I've sometimes heard about the social sciences and social science. Social scientists themselves. And I'll use examples mostly from climate, because that's where I've done most of my research. And I would point out that, of course, neither the natural sciences or the social sciences have one set of views. And in fact, part of the problem, as I'll point out, in the collaboration between social and natural sciences is the really intense and severe disagreements within social sciences that sometimes confuse our natural science colleagues. So let's go to the first set of myths or misunderstandings or assumptions, and that's what I call the persistence of environmental determinism. Environmental determinism assumes that the physical environment is the most important factor influencing the impacts of, for example, disasters, the success of agricultural production, or the overall sustainability of economies. And this was a view that was very prevalent around the beginning of the 20th century, where, in fact, very controversially, some geographers such as Ellsworth Huntington were saying that, it was climate that determined not only economic success, but also intelligence in different parts of the world, and it was heavily criticized. But I would suggest to you that there's a tendency that continues that assumes that the priority is to understand the magnitude of the environmental changes affecting society, rather than the other vulnerabilities of societies that contribute to crises. We still tend to think that in understanding future climate impacts, that the bulk of our investment, the bulk of our understanding should focus on explaining and understanding the physical climate rather than all of the other things that determine climate impacts. So, as an example, early in my career, I actually became interested in global change because I was born in West Africa, and I was really concerned about famines that I would hear about in Africa, and also concerned and interested in patterns of disaster loss in places like Latin America. And the assumption was that these were mainly caused by changes in the physical environment, that it was nature that was to blame for these crises. And I started off my career working at the National Centre for Atmospheric Research in the US, where most of my colleagues in the climate science side of NCAR assumed that famine and disaster were explained mostly by the magnitude of climatic extremes, the severity of the drought or flood, or the intensity of the hurricane. And as I said, even now, much of the focus of understanding the impacts of climate change and much of the focus of funding for research is still on the climate and environmental science side of things, reducing the uncertainty of model projections, improving the physical basis of crop models, predicting the paths of hurricanes. However, what social science has shown us over the last couple of decades is that the impacts of drought and other climate events depend as much on social and economic conditions in a region as on the physical changes in rainfall or other meteorological factors. This means that to understand climate impacts, you have to spend as much time, if not more, understanding patterns of poverty, technology and economy as you do analysing climate data or models. The term vulnerability is used to describe this idea that climate impacts are determined as much by society as they are by natural events. In some cases, such as African famine, drought may play a very minor role, with poverty, war, insecure land tenure, and lack of infrastructure much more important. Now, although the global change community now takes vulnerability much more seriously in Working Group 2 of the IPCC, for example, we still lack large-scale research funding to understand and compare the causes and patterns of vulnerability or the ways in which adaptation of social systems can reduce this vulnerability. And, for example, within the National Science Foundation in the US, there's very little funding for vulnerability, where there are literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars available for climate model and climate science. I think it's a little better in Europe in terms of the balance of investment.